Okay.
A gute Woche. A guten Chodesh. This afternoon, the Rebbe Gesundheit began the Farbrengen based on the word of that the Frierdiker Rebbe would repeat very often, "Am darf leben mit der Zeit." Means we have to live with the times, and this is a word which goes back to the Alter Rebbe, and it's interpreted that it means we have to live with Pashas HaShavua, and that there's the lesson which we can derive from Pashas HaShavua, and with that we have to live. The Rebbe right away continued, though that in the Parsha there are many inyanim that are discussed in the Parsha. Parsha is not just one inyan. And in fact, taking for example this week's Parsha, the name of the Sedra is Mishpatim, plural. So this right away tells us that there are many inyanim, many mitzvahs which come into the category of Mishpatim that are all discussed in this week's Sedra. So when we are searching for an inyan in the Sedra, als Leben mit der Zeit, to discuss what we have to take a hera from, there are many inyanim in this week's Sedra. But again, the fact, says the Rebbe, that all of these inyanim are united in one Sedra, this in itself shows that there is something in common between all of these inyanim. Just based on the fact that these inyanim and nothing else and nothing more is put together for this Sedra. The truth is, there's a whole explanation how the entire Torah is really one inyan. Kol ha-Torah kula inyan echad. The Rebbe spoke about it at previous occasions. But in more detail, when we're talking about one Sedra, though there are many inyanim combined in the contents of the Sedra, but being that these inyanim are together, there is an achdus amongst the inyanim which are in the Sedra. And here, like mentioning the inyan of achdus, Rebbe says that the achdus which is in Torah also has to do with the unity amongst Klal Yisrael. As Chazal tell us, Yesh Shishim Ribuy Oisiyas LaTorah, Yisrael abbreviates that there are 600,000 letters to the Torah, and this is the number of Yidden which put together the Jewish nation when the Yidden left Mitzrayim and came to Har Sinai to receive the Torah. They were also in the number of 600,000. So again we see that the number which is in Torah and the number which is in Yidden correspond one to another. Why? Because there's a very strong relationship between Torah and Yidden. And just like we're talking about the Achdus, the unity which is in Torah, the same is also a unity which is required amongst Yidden. And here the Rebbe continues that in Shulchan Aruch consists of 4 parts of Shulchan Aruch. Each one has a separate name, and the name of the first part of the Shulchan Aruch is Oirach Chaim. Oirach Chaim means a way of life. And when the Beis Yosef made the Shulchan Aruch, he was the one that also chose these appropriate names for every part of the Shulchan Aruch. And every part of the Shulchan Aruch has its name, as the further halakim, for example, Even HaEzer, Choshe Mishpat, Yerodeya, and all of these names relate to the inyanim, the halachas, which are discussed in this part of Shulchan Aruch. But furthermore, being that the first part of Shulchan Aruch is called Oirach Chaim, a way of life, this actually refers to the entire Shulchan Aruch. That the entire Shulchan Aruch is what? It's a way of life for every Yid. In other words, our way of life, whatever we may encounter in life, we have directions from Shulchan Aruch how to go about it. And here the Rebbe adds on, it is called Oirach Chaim, a way of life. The first word is Oirach, which is composed of the word Oir and a Ches. Oir, Ches is the word Oirach. So this also reminds us how Torah is Oir. By following the Oirach Chaim, Torah is the source of light and illumination, and Ches right away reminding us on Chaim, on life. And Torah is an illumination for the entire life of a person, of a Yid. And what do we find at the end of the Oirach Chaim? At the end of the Orach Chaim we find the last words, the closing words of the Orach Chaim of the first part of Shulchan Aruch is V'toiv leiv mishta tamid. That it's always good to be happy. A toiv leiv is mishta tamid. This is discussed regarding the end of the Shulchan Aruch talks about the dinim of Purim cotton, which is in other Rishon we have a Purim cotton. So the Shulchan Aruch says that a toiv leiv, mishta tamid, is always involved, and a mishta is always involved in the meaning of simcha. In other words, a yid should always be involved in the meaning of mishta v'simcha. And this is b'chlal appropriate to this week's Sedra. Because in this week's Sedra, in Parshas Mishpatim, the Torah discusses in detail all of the 3 Yomim Tovim. We find many times in the Torah that the Torah refers to the Yomim Tovim, but the Torah should talk out specifically about all of the 3 Yomim Tovim, all of the Shalosh Regalim, which what is the inyan of the Shalosh Regalim? It's also in the inyan of Simcha. This we find in this week's Sedra. And talking about the inyan of the Shalosh Regalim, the Yomim Tovim, the Rebbe raised a very interesting question. The Rebbe raised the question, why is Yom Tov called Yom Tov? Yom Tov means Yom Tov, a good day. Tov is a very good, deep inyan. Tov, numeric value is 17, and there are a lot of inyanim that have a shaykhis to Tov and have a shaykhis to Chai, which is 18, and both of these numbers are one next to each other. All very, very in-depth inyanim. But at the same time, we see that the word Yom Tov, referring to the Jewish holidays, is even in Tefillah, in davening, which was said by the Anshe Knesset Agdela. They were the ones that formed the text of Tefillah. There we also use the word Yom Tov, referring to a day of Yom Tov, to a day of Chag. So the Rebbe is asking, why is it that even the Chachamim have chosen that the Yomim Tovim, again, we constantly should be called Yom Tov. In the Torah, we do not find this expression. The Torah talks specifically about each of the Chagim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, and each of the Chagim has its hashpah, its revelation, which is suitable to that Chag, which this is what this Chag brings. The first time we find the expression of Yom Tov, this was set up by the Chachamim, and to such an extent that they even entered it into Tefillah, into davening, that we refer to the Chagim with the title of Yom Tov. So Rebbe asked the question and did not answer it. Left it an unanswered question. Why is this that Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot was chosen by the Chachamim specifically to use this word Yom Tov, which let's be translated. It's a good day, a guter tag, and Tov is, as mentioned earlier, a very, very significant. But at the same time, there's definitely an explanation why they chose to use this word to refer to all the Chagim. Rabbi concluded that the Shulchan Aruch, the 4 parts of the Shulchan Aruch which we were just discussing, beginning with the Orach Chaim, all of this was edited by the Beis Yosef. As the expression goes, all the halachas are put out clear like a set table, which is what we find in this week's Rashi. Rashi tells us that Torah has to be taught k'shulchan aruch, just like a table that's set. It's also mentioned not only is the Shulchan Aruch a table that's set, but there's also a tablecloth on the table. What is the tablecloth? The mappa that is on the table. That is the addition of the Ramah. The Ramah added on, first the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, he was the one that wrote the Shulchan Aruch originally. Then the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserlish, he was the one that came along. The Beis Yosef was a Sephardi. The Ramah was an Ashkenazi. And he usually entered on the existing text of the Beis Yosef. He just added on many halachas which the Ashkenazim do not do, like the Svardim, or difference of opinions with the Beis Yosef. And this, the Rebbe says, this is added on top of the Shulchan Aruch, which, as we translated, a set table, on top of what the Beis Yosef gave us, a set table. Today we also have a tablecloth on the table, which this is what the Ramah added on top of the Shulchan Aruch. Now the Rebbe is continuing, going back to the Parshas HaShavua, And as mentioned, though there are many inyanim in the Sedre, but nonetheless, we will stress on one of the inyanim in the Sedre. And that is right away at the beginning of Pashas Mishpatim. Rashi tells us that the expression here in the pasuk is ve'ela hamishpatim asher tasim lefneim. And Rashi raises a question: why does the pasuk use the expression ve'ela and not ela with an additional vav? Vav shows that it comes as a continuity to the previous sedra. And Rashi adds maharishonim misinai af elu misinai, that we should know, just like what we discussed in last week's sedra in Parshas Yisroi was given to Yidden from Sinai, from the Rebishter. The same what we are learning about in this week's sedra is also misinai. In other words, as the Rebbe explained, as we will hear soon, even though here we are talking about Mishpatim, and Mishpatim is the category of mitzvahs that we can understand with our own logic, with our own seichel, so the Torah is telling us that even this category of mitzvahs is also coming, Sinai, it's also coming from the Rebishter. But the Rebbe did ask why Rashi makes an issue of Eila or Ve'ela. Probably in Chumash until now we've already found an expression of Eila or Ve'ela, and nonetheless Rashi did not make mention of it. And here it is that Rashi does. But if we go weiter, we look into the same Rashi a little bit further. Rashi tells us, Lama nismecha parshas dinim la parshas mizbeach. Why is it take that the halachas of dinim of Mishpatim was put next to the halachas of Mizbeach, which is the end, the conclusion of Parshas Yisroi? Lei Malachot to tell us, Shatosim Sanhedrin Eitzel HaMikdash, Eitzel HaMizbeach. That where should be the place of the Sanhedrin? The Sanhedrin that sat in Yerushalayim, the main Sanhedrin, they should be situated next to the Mizbeach. So on one hand, Rashi is trying to stress that this Sedra comes as a continuity to the inyan of Sinai, which took place in Parashas Yisroi. And right away in the same Rashi is stressing not the continuity to the inyan of Sinai of Parashas Yisroi, but the continuity to the inyan of Mizbeach, which is the end of the Sedra. Now, Memanashach, if Rashi is eager to explain that this Sedra comes as a Hemshech and it's Misinai, just like everything which was discussed in Parashas Yisroi, that's not what Rashi says in the second half. In the second half of the same Rashi says that the ve'ela, the continuity, the vav, to the previous Sedra is based on the fact that at the end of the Sedra, the inyan of Mizbeach was discussed. And to tell us that here we are talking about an inyan that has a shaykhas to Sanhedrin, that where should Sanhedrin be situated, where should be the place of Sanhedrin next to Mizbeach. So this the Rebbe explains, as mentioned, by Rashi saying, Ma rishonim misinai, af elo misinai. Rashi is stressing that even though we are talking about mitzvahs that go into the category of mishpatim, as mentioned, these are mitzvahs that even if Torah would have not have told us to do so, we'd have also understand that this is the proper way to act. An honest person, a sincere person, a reputable person would not do any different. But nonetheless, Rashi is telling us we have to remember that why do we do it? We are doing this because Sinai. We're not doing it because our logic tells us to do it. We're not doing it because we feel that it should be done. We do it because of our commitment to the Rebishter. What is the inyan of Mizbeach? Mizbeach is the inyan of sacrifice. Karbanos were brought on the Mizbeach. So what does Mizbeach really stand for? Mizbeach stands for the inyan of Mesiras Nefesh. And what is Rashi here telling us? Even though we are talking about Mishpatim, Mishpatim is an inyan of Seichel. Nonetheless, we should know that even in the inyan of Mishpatim, the mitzvahs that go into the category of Mishpatim, these mitzvahs also have to be permeated with Mesiras Nefesh. And that is the shaykhs to the inyan of Mizbeach. Mizbeach stands for Mesiras Nefesh. And on the other hand, Rabbi stresses it's not sufficient that it should be an inyan of Mesiras Nefesh only. These mitzvahs of Mishpatim have to be brought down in Seichel and understood in Seichel, and at the same time we have to know how strong is our commitment to these mitzvahs, Misinai, and also at the same time stressing the inyan of Mizbeach, because Mizbeach stresses the fact of dedication to the extent of Mesiras Nefesh. That's the inyan of Mizbeach. Chazal also tell us, the Rebbe concludes, that the shulchan of the table of a person's house is also compared to a mizbeach. Table in every Jewish home is compared to a mizbeach. And what does this stress? In other words, that table in every Jewish home, in other words, how every Jewish home functions, has to also be with the same approach of what mizbeach stands for. Mizbeach is the inyan of Mesiras Nefesh, dedication to the fullest extent, to the highest extent, and this is what every Jewish home also has to be built on the inyan that we have to realize that Shulchan is Shel Adam, that the table of a house, that is the Mizbeach. And here the Rebbe got into an inyan which he's concluding the first Sicha with, and he's going into the second Sicha, that Yidden have three characteristics which a Jew can be identified with. And that is that every Yid is a Baishon, has the midah of Baishonis, the midah of being ashamed within him. The midah of Rachmanis, every Yid possesses. And at the same time, every Yid also possesses the inyan of Gemilas Chesed. He's always ready to go ahead and help somebody. And this abbreviates Gever. Gever, a man. When one possesses all these three qualifications, then he is a Gever. Gever, Gemilus Chesed for Gimel, Beis for Baishonim, and the Reish for Rachmanis. Rabbi says it's also brought out in the word Basar, flesh, meat. What shaykhs does it have? The Beis is Baishonim, the Shin, the Rebbe teached, is Shoimrei Chasodim, which is the same idea as Gemilas Chesed. They observe the inyan of doing Chesed, acts of kindness one to another, and the Reish is back to Rachman. It says it's also appropriate to use this abbreviation of Basar, because in Basar we have letter Shin. Letter Shin is composed of three kavim, of three lines, and this reminds us on these three. It stresses again the inyan of three. And it also stresses the inyan of Gemilas Chsadim. Gemilas Chsadim has a special shaykhs to number three. Gemara uses, there's an expression in Gemara, Gimel Daled is Gemoil Dalem. When one does an act of Gemilas Chesed, he helps somebody else. Gemilas Chesed isn't only in finances. Gemilas Chesed could be helping somebody in any shape, helping somebody with a good advice, with a good word. So it's also an inyan of Gimel Daled. So the inyan of Gimel, the inyan of three, and three is reflected in letter Shin, because the letter Shin is composed of three lines that put together the Shin, has a special shaykhs to the inyan of Gemilas Chesed. As the Rebbe brought it out, there's the inyan of lechem and there's the inyan of basa. Lechem is a requirement. The person has to come on to lechem, bread. Basa is already something additional. That is what we find, again, bringing back the inyan of Yomim Tovim, ein simcha elo bebasa. On Yontev, we're obligated to eat basa, because how do we bring out a gashmi is the joy, a gashmi is the simcha, is brought out by eating basa. And here the Rebbe comes to the halacha and Rambam of today's Shir Rambam. We're learning in the halachas of Shabbos. The Rebbe says this is already the sixth cycle of learning Rambam. And number 6 is also a number of significance. It has to do with the Elef Hashishi, which we are in now. The 6,000th year of the creation of the world. And it's in the halachas that come after the halachas of Shabbos comes the halachas of Erevin, which is also part of halachas Shabbos. Shabbos, we know we are prohibited to carry in any open place. Where are we permitted to carry? Only in a Reshus HaYochid. Rishus Harabim we're not allowed to carry, which is a public place, like a street or so. But not only that, if there's an huge open field or a huge open yard, if there's no Erev, it has not been treated properly that we should be allowed to carry there, we are not allowed to carry there. Now in the fourth Perek of Hilchas Erevin, the Rambam begins with a halacha. Anshei Chotzer. The olden days, it seems like the setup was many people lived in one yard. It used to go like yards, big yards, and this yard would contain many houses within it. Now, Anshei Chotzer, all the residents of the Chotzer, Shoyukulam Oichlem al Shulchan Echad. They would all eat in one central place. Afalpi shekol echad ve'echad yesh lebayis b'fnei atzmoi. Even though everyone has his place of residence where he lives, nonetheless, being that they all eat in the same place, ein tzrichin erev. There is no need for them to make an erev, to be allowed, to be permitted to carry in that chutzah, in that yard. Why? Mipnei sheheim ka'anshei bayis echad. Because it's really considered as if they all live at this location where they all eat. For halachic purposes, we look after where the person has his meal. And being that they all have their meal there, it's kind of creating that place for a Rishus HaYochid. And there is no need for them to make an Erev because they are all Samuch al Shulchan Echad. They are all eating on one table. This expression of being Samuch al Shulchan Echad, all eating on one table, so this is what the Rebbe is bringing out in the Ruchnius, in the spiritual part of the Halacha. The Rebbe keeps on mentioning at many occasions that there is an expression in the Rambam. The Rambam says that mitzvahs are given l'sakein hadeyos, to straighten out our minds. In other words, besides the gashmistic fulfillment of the mitzvah, which otherwise we're not mekayim the mitzvah, there is the ruchniistic, there's the spiritual interpretation which every mitzvah has within it, has to it. And the same when we're talking here. All of Klal Yisrael, says the Rebbe, all the Yidden are really samuch, are really dependent on one table. Why? Because we are all being fed from the same source. We are all being fed from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Though there are differences. There is the poor, there is the rich, there is Yisachar, there is Zevulun. And here, right away, while mentioning poor and rich, it says we really have to know what's the... It's a Gemara. Gemara tells us, Yoiser mimashe ha-balabayis oise im ha'oni oise im ha-balabayis. More than what the donor does with the poor. In other words, he thinks he's accomplishing something very big. He's giving the poor person a donation. But the truth is that the poor person, the recipient of the donation, is really doing a bigger act of charity to the giver. In other words, because the bottom line is that the giver, the donor, is the one that's really gaining by it. The reward for tzedakah is so great that the one who's giving the tzedakah will really wind up gaining from giving the tzedakah. So it's the poor person who is doing an act of charity to the contributor. It's working the other way around. Actually, as the Rebbe is saying, it's working both ways. Let us use the expression of there's a mashpia and a mekabel. There's the one who is giving and the one who's receiving. So each one of them is really a giver and each one of them is really a receiver. So again, getting back to the halacha, when we're bringing out about everyone being samuch al shulchan echad, it's all of these categories of people, whether we're talking about a Yisachar or a Zavulun or an Ashir or a Nani. Every Yid, what's the source of every Yid's food? Everybody is Samach al Shulchan Echad. We are all dependent on one table. We are all dependent on the Rabbeinu Shalom, who's providing all of our needs. When the Rebbe is talking about providing needs, when we're asking from the Rebbe he should provide our needs, we really want him, he should give us needs in the fullest sense as we taka need it. Not like it was by the Rebbe of Reb Zusha Ma'anipala. Because Reb Zusha of Anipali was a
colleague of the Alter Rebbe. They both were together by the Maggid of Mizrich. There's a famous story that a Yid once came to the Maggid and he said, the Gemara tells us that just like one has to bench on Toiv, the same way he has to thank God and be thankful for the opposite of Toiv. So he says, Rebbe, I don't understand it. I mean, after all, how is it possible? When we have obvious good, when we have good that we understand it's good, we can understand it, we can appreciate from the Rebbe. But Chas v'Shalom, when it's the other way around, how can we appreciate it? So the Maggid told him, I have a disciple by the name of Reb Zusha. Go visit Reb Zusha, go to Anapola, he lived in the city of Anapola, and when you'll visit Reb Zusha, you will be able to understand your question. Okay. He followed the instruction of the Maggid, and he went to Anapola, and he comes into Reb Zusha, and he comes into a house which, to describe the poverty, what it looked like by Reb Zusha, thank God, we have no idea whatsoever. And he comes into Reb Zusha, and he sees a house full of children, and he sees no furniture, no food, no clothing. And he goes over to Reb Zusha, and he approaches him, he says, Shalom Aleichem, I was sent by the Maggid of Mizrich, that you will be able to tell me, you will be able to explain what is the meaning of the Gemara, Kishem shemevorech ala toiva, kach mevorech ala ra. He says, I can't understand why the Maggid sent you to me. Why me? I have no idea. I can't understand it. The Chassid, who was a smart, an Ehrlich Yid and a smart person, looked around the situation, what the house looked like. He understood very well why the Maggid sent him there. But the answer of Reb Zusha was, weiß nicht. He doesn't know why the Maggid sent him here. Baruch Hashem, by him everything is an obvious good. Everything is good in the fullest extent, and he has no idea why he was sent here. Again, so what we derive from this is that it has to be toiv. When we're talking about good, it means, Rebbe is getting back to our reunion, when we're talking about Yidden being samuch al shulchan avi, and we're all surrounding one table, being fed at one table, and the one who's feeding us all is the Rebbeinu Shleilam. But again, the Rebbe should give it. He should give it in a way that there shouldn't be no poor amongst Yidden, and Yidden should have whatever they need. When we're talking about having it, we mean it in the fullest sense. Here the Rebbe referred to another Maaseh. Mentioned Reb Nachum of Chernobyl. Nachum of Chernobyl, it is related that he was heavy, he was fat, and it's told it wasn't from food, it was from reciting Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbah. He would say Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbah with such an enjoyment, with such a pleasure, that he simply gained a lot of weight from it. So the Rebbe is bringing out, when we're talking about having Gashmias, we mean not in the Ruchniistic sense like Reb Nachum of Chernobyl had it. We mean Pashat Gashmis, that Yidden should be blessed with Gashmis and really have it and utilize it properly. And throughout the Sichos, there were also some very, very strong words. The Rebbe says in Svarim there's an expression, Hilchas L'Mshicha, something which is not Negeya, which is not relevant. Mara uses the expression, this will be Negeya when Mashiach will come. In other words, there was a time when the need of Mashiach was looked at that it's a far-fetched thing. It's not, has nothing which is Negeya contemporary. It's something which will be Negeya when Mashiach will come. Rabbi says, but today we cannot have such expressions anymore. Today we're waiting for the coming of Mashiach, and any second that's delayed, we wait for him and we're anxious for his coming and so forth. Getting back here to the halachas of Shabbos, there's also an inyan which the Rebbe stressed it today, stressed it at recent previous Farbrengens as well. The Rebbe is stressing, we say that Shabbos we are not allowed to carry, only in the Rishus HaYochid. And Bechlal, the inyan of carrying on Shabbos, though there are 39 prohibitions on Shabbos, 39 malachas which we're not allowed to do, nonetheless we see that Masechta Shabbos, which discusses all the halachas of Shabbos, what does it begin with? It begins with the halachas of carrying, where we're not allowed to carry, the prohibition of carrying and so forth.
Why? Because in the inyan of meleches hitzah, the malacha of carrying, there's something very major in the entire concept of Shabbos. We say, where are we allowed to carry? Only in a Rishus HaYochid. What is the inyan of Rishus HaYochid? Or Rishus HaYochid versus Rishus HaRabim? Rishus HaRabim is a public area. That means there's room for everybody there. Or as in Kabbalah and Chassidus, it's used the expression, Teure de Preude, mountains that part. Teure means a mountain. De Preude, de Peruda am Pirud. Parting mountains. In other words, there's room for Yetzer Tov and for Yetzer Hara in Rishus HaRabim. When we're talking about Rishus HaYochid, it means Rishus HaYochid, it's a singled out area. An area which is only for whom? For the Yechida Shalaylam. An area which is only for the Rabbeinu Shalaylam. So that's why, what's the whole inyan of Shabbos? The whole inyan of Shabbos is to uplift the world, that the world will come to a level of Rishus HaYochid. Singled out area where only Kedusha is felt. That's why in Rishus HaYochid we are permitted to carry. We are permitted to, because this stresses the fact of an area that has only to do with Kedusha. All other areas which are not Rishus HaYochid, we are not permitted to carry. While talking about the inyan of Shulchan Aruch, how Shulchan Aruch surrounds a person's life. And this really relates to everyone. It relates to men, women, and children. It has a shaykhus to every yid. And we're talking about every yid. It's brought out best in the word keli. Keli, a vessel. Keli is an abbreviation of Kohen Levi Yisrael. It's also, which encompasses all of Klal Yisrael. Kohen Levi Yisrael can also be read as Yelech, the opposite way around. Starting with Yisrael, Levi, Kohen. Then it's Yelech. Yelech means to go. In other words, when we are involved in verbinding everyone and tying in everyone with Eira Chaim, with Shulchan Aruch, with Ve'ela Mishpatim Asher Tosim Lifneim, and as Chassidus teaches, what does it mean, Tosim Lifneim? You should put it in front of them. These are the mishpatim that should be prepared just like a set table. But Chassidus teich is a deeper teich. Lifneim also means lipnimi yusam, to the real inside pnimius of a yid. You reach a yid and affect a yid with these mitzvahs of mishpatim. The mitzvahs of mishpatim, though, as mentioned earlier, on one hand it seems that these are mitzvahs which are merely logical mitzvahs. But at the same time, we are told it's dafke with these mitzvahs that these mitzvahs reach to the pnimius, to the insight of a yid. The Rebbe ended the Farbrengen. Says it's customary to end. That's how he said it. That it's customary to end the Farbrengen by introducing a new request or a new suggestion. The Rebbe says it would be extremely appropriate. The way he said it was that the next few weeks we're going to be learning the sedres of Trumot, Tetzaveh, and Kisisa, and all of these sedres deal with the erecting of the Mishkan, the instructions how to erect the Mishkan, and then we come to Vayakel, how the Mishkan was erected. In actuality, how it was done. The Rebbe says it would be appropriate that in addition to Chitas, which we learn daily, in fact in the first Sikha the Rebbe also reminded us on the importance of learning Chitas, it would be advisable every day to learn one or several of quotations of Chazal, Mamorei Chazal, in Torah Shebal Peh, that relate to the Parsha Chumash of that day. In other words, whether it's a Gemara, a Taichan, from the Gemara explains a pasuk, or a Medrash that explains a pasuk. The Rebbe says it's already printed in Svarim, where we have, for example, the Rebbe didn't mention it, but for example, there's a Chumash with the Torah Tmima. The Chumash Torah Tmima has, in fact, this is the Chumash which the Rabbeim use. Rebbe soll gesund sein, Friedeke Rebbe, and told that even the Friedeke Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashab, they all used to use the Torah Tmima Chumash when listening Shabbos to Kriyas HaTorah. They always listen from a Torah Tmima Chumash. In the Torah Tmima Chumash we have quotations of Gemara, where the Gemara explains or says something regarding the psukim which we learn in Chumash. Or there are other svarim which are around today which also have quotations of Chazal of Torah Shebal Peh, which relate to the Psukim and Chumash. It's also customary in the Farbrengen of Pashas Mishpatim. There's an organization here, a free loan organization, which is called Gemilas Chesed Shemrei Shabbos, which is headed by Reb Shimon Goldman. And they always make a Malava Malka tonight, because tonight is suitable for Gemilas Chesed, because in Pashas Mishpatim we read about him Kesef Talve, about giving Gemilas Chesedim. The Rebbe always tells him during the Farbrengen that he should put on a shtreimel and he should tell a story. He should say something. He's told a very nice story today. You notice that while he was telling the story, the Rebbe was sitting back and listening, following him, listening to the story. The Alter Rebbe had a chassid, Rabbi Isaac of Vitebsk, who was a Rav in the city of Vitebsk. He was one of the Alter Rebbe's outstanding chassidim. And it was once on a Friday afternoon that Rabbi Isaac was on his way to the mikveh, Friday afternoon. And as he's going to the mikveh, approaches him a Yid in town, and he says, I have to have a din Torah. So Rabbi Isaac tells him, must it be right now? So he says, yes. And he explains himself. He says, I am a melamed, I am a teacher. And all week long I'm occupied. And I have no time to come to a din Torah. The only free time I have is Friday afternoon. So I'm asking of you, Rav, please come with me for the din Torah. Rabbi Isaac immediately joined this Yid, and they went back home. And when they come into the house, Rabbi Isaac asks him, where's the other party? Who are you having the din Torah with? So he says, the other party I'm having the din Torah with is the Rebishter, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Isaac turned very serious. That's how he told the story. And Rabbi Isaac put on Big Day Shabbos, and he told the man, speak up. What is your taina? What is your argument? So he says, yes. As I told you, I am a teacher. And whatever I take in, whatever I'm being compensated for teaching, is not sufficient to support my family. He had a large family, and he already had 2 daughters who were ready to get married, and he doesn't have a cent to marry them with. Marry them off. The Gemara tells us, he says, that there are 3 partners in the person. The Rebishter, father and mother. We are also told that Li HaKesef, Li HaZav, the Rebishter is the source of all the gold and of all silver. It says when there are 3 partners, 2 partners do not have anything to come up with. And the 3rd partner is the source of everything. I'm demanding at a din Torah, why doesn't the 3rd partner come up with his share so that I should be able to marry my children? Rabbi Isaac listened to him, and he told him, after listening to him, he thought for a few moments, and he turns to this Malamed, he turns to this teacher, and he tells him, you won the din Torah. You are right, you won the din Torah. A short while passed, and to the house of the Malamed comes a messenger from the Poritz. You know, in the olden times there were the Poritz would rule over the entire area. And a messenger comes from the Poritz to the wife of the Malamed, and it tells her as follows, that the wife of the Poritz is extremely sick. She hurt herself and she doesn't feel well, and all doctors have no way to help her. But in the Poritz house they feel that they always knew that Jews have some sort of a mystic way how they could help cure somebody. Have all kind of different tricks Jews have. And therefore you are summoned right away to come along with me and help me cure the wife of the Poritz. You should be the one that will cure the wife of the Poritz. She didn't know what he wanted from her. But again, if somebody is summoned from the Poritz, gateman. So she went along. And the Rebishter helped. That whatever she did worked. And after all, her husband wanted in Torah. And they took care of her very, very nicely. They compensated her in a very unusual way for helping the Pirate's wife. And with the amount of money that she came home, not only did they have to help their situation, not only did they have to marry the 2 daughters, but there wasn't enough left that they should be able to have a head start for the rest of the children. Okay, a good